The 9800 X3D is finally here. And to be honest, it might be the best CPU we've ever tested in-house. Let's break it down. All right, so what is the 9800 X3D? Well, it's an 8-core, 16-thread CPU. It is rocking a lot of L2 cache. That is the biggest difference because it is the X3D variant of the 9000 series. It also has a new higher base clock and a new higher boost clock versus its predecessor, the 7800 X3D, which was before the king of gaming. So we're gonna find out if this new CPU is actually gonna be able to dethrone the previous predecessor, the 7800 X3D. So let's start comparing it in different games. So as far as specs on what we use for the AMD platform and the Intel platform, these are the two systems that we use. Here's the Intel one, here's the AMD one. We just wanted to provide you some more context on what we used, so let's jump right into the first game. All right, so the first game we'll be testing, which is a very heavy CPU-bound game, and obviously when we do the testing with CPUs, we're always doing 1080p, lower resolution, bottlenecks the CPU a lot more, becomes more CPU-bound. So Far Cry 6 is a huge one, a lot of people use it, and as you can see, I'm gonna start off with the 7800 X3D, which was the previous crown, when it came to gaming, and it did really good on this game when it came to the actual testing. So as you can see, it averaged 249 FPS. The maximum was 326 and the minimum was 194. Very good numbers. And then as the i9 comes in, it averaged 256, 345, and 216 on the minimum. Keep in mind, at the time, the i9 was about $180 more in cost. So obviously the better choice was the 7800 X3D, it being only a 4 to 5 FPS difference. Now, as time has moved on, the CPUs have come down in price. 7800 X3D is a little bit better price-wise. It's like $360 now, and the i9 now is right around the $430 price point. So if you move into the 9800 X3D, this is where it gets kind of interesting. The 9800 X3D just came out November 7th, and the cost on it is $479. So it is a little bit more in price, about $40 more than the i9, right around $100 more than the 7800 X3D, but there's a huge difference in performance. The average FPS is 303. That is a 54 difference in FPS just on the average. The maximum is 372, a pretty decent jump there as well. And then the minimum is 243 versus 194 on the 7800 X3D and 216 on the i9 14900K. So we can see a nice jump in performance just on this first title that we tested on, and it's not a small percentage. I mean, it's a pretty drastic difference. So let's move on to the next one. All right, moving on to Black Ops 6, which this is a new game that just came out. It's been a massive hit in the gaming industry. Everyone's loving it. Great combat, great movement, just overall kind of like the older roots of Call of Duty. So this is something we definitely wanted to test, and the good thing too, it has its own built-in benchmark as well to make it a lot easier for us. So when it comes to the performance on this, I'm gonna start off with the lowest number, which the numbers on this one was kind of interesting for me. On the i9 setup, it averaged 251 FPS. And keep in mind, this is what we're doing with these setups is we're literally booting up, making sure all the drivers are up to date, BIOS up to date, XMP is enabled. We're not doing any crazy tuning on like this. Is literally out of the box with just some basic, pretty much tuning in Windows itself. So 251 average FPS on the i9. On the 7800 X3D, it jumps up to 343 FPS. That is a massive difference. So we're looking at about a 90 FPS difference just from the i9 14900K to the 7800 X3D. So a huge difference there. Then when we jump up to the 9800 X3D, we're averaging 370 FPS. So again, we're jumping up another about 27 FPS from the 7800 X3D, which is the previous king of gaming, to the new 9800 X3D at 370 FPS. You can squeeze out a lot more performance out of this game. There is a lot of tuning that can be done to squeeze out a lot more performance for the i9, so I guarantee you can probably get the i9 a little bit closer to the performance of the 9800 X3D. But there's one thing I forgot to mention in the beginning. The 9800 X3D is now, you're able to overclock it. The 7800 X3D we're not able to overclock, so now with games like Call of Duty, games like Fortnite, games that are very CPU heavy, you can even squeeze out a little bit more performance out of it. So these numbers are impressive just out of the box without any crazy tuning. So 9800 X3D so far is pretty much killing it. So we'll see what the next game entails for us. All right, so moving into Fortnite, which this is a BR, it does not have a built-in benchmark utility, so obviously it's a lot harder to test. But what we decided to do is actually give you some gameplay footage of it. So as you can see, the biggest thing with Fortnite, especially when you drop out of the bus, frame rate dips heavily. And on the 9800 X3D, as you can clearly see, the FPS didn't drop nowhere near as the amount as the 7800 X3D did, which the 7800 X3D did have that issue. The 1% loans weren't the greatest. So as you can see, the 9800 X3D, the new king, as you can clearly see so far, it has surpassed that, and the minimums have been a lot better, and the averages have been a lot better as well. So that's why we wanted to show you just actual gameplay footage so you can kind of see it yourself. All right, moving on to Assassin's Creed. Now this is again another game that is very CPU heavy, and the results on this one is very interesting. It kind of shows the 7800 X3D, how it kind of underperformed when it comes to the 1% lows, but it had a very good average and a very good maximum as well. So as you can see, the 7800 X3D did average 242 FPS, but the FPS minimum was 82 in comparison to the i9 14900K, which was 102. The average FPS was 251 for the i9, and the max, as you can see, was 341 versus 410. So the 7800 X3D and the i9 in this scenario was pretty close. The minimum was not as good on the 7800 X3D, but then when we move into the new 9800 X3D with the new X3D cache, you can see the average is not that much higher than the i9 or the 7800 X3D. It's 255, but the FPS minimum is 125 FPS. So that's gonna give you a better quality experience when it comes to the actual gaming aspect of things. Also, the FPS max was 425, again, pretty much blowing out the i9 from 341, and the 7800 X3D at 410, not by much there, but the biggest thing is definitely the minimum, 82 FPS to 125. That is a massive difference on the minimum. At the end of the day, the 9800 X3D is definitely the king of gaming, and honestly, I do not see anything coming out anytime soon to be able to dethrone this thing. Subscribe.